One of the most important proofs of God's existence and attributes is the magnificent order in the universe. Come on, man. What order are you talking about? Animals eat each other, floods and earthquakes happen, disabled children are born. What order? The universe is not a modern metropolis, but a cursed slum neighborhood. Chaos. Everywhere is chaos. Besides, there's chaos theory in physics. I'm talking about an incredible order that is twisted with emotional manipulation and conceptual confusion. Or you can call it order if you prefer. Now friends, first let's understand this conceptual confusion. In the order we claim exists in the universe and consider as evidence for God's existence, the death of people in earthquakes, or animals eating each other, or children getting sick, have no relevance. These are separate issues, and these are questions we sometimes address under the topic of the problem of evil, and this is very important. These questions are not about the existence or non-existence of God, but could be arguments about whether He is very merciful or not. But the physical order in the universe, which we consider as evidence for God's existence, includes the occurrence of earthquakes, the collision of two stars, and even the movement of a diseased cell in a child's body, encompassing an incredible system of rules. What am I referring to? Now imagine a city, imagine a metropolis. How do we determine whether there is order in a metropolis? First, rules. Should there be laws, right? Social rules, traffic rules, and different rules for different parts. For example, rules for teachers at school, rules for students, or rules for truck drivers in traffic, rules for taxi drivers, rules for pedestrians, and so on. For instance, you must stop at a red light, or if you're a driver, the distance between you and the vehicle ahead should be at least half of your speed, and so on. But this is not enough for order. The most important thing is that these rules are followed. For example, even though there are rules in Brazil, we say Brazil's traffic is not orderly enough because people don't follow them much. But for example, in Norway, we say Norway's traffic is quite orderly because the rule to stop at a red light is followed at a rate of 99%. So, for there to be order, we can probably say this. 1. Rules. Laws must exist. General rules and specific rules for parts. 2. Order emerges to the extent that these rules and laws are obeyed by the parts. Now let's ask these questions for the universe. Are there general or specific rules? If so, to what extent are these rules followed by the parts? Look, even asking these questions would be an insult to all scientific disciplines dealing with the universe, especially physics, and the technologies we produce, because science is conducted with the presumption that the components of the universe have universal rules and adhere to them independently of time and space. For example, science, after repeatedly observing that two particles with the same charge repel each other according to a specific law, it generalizes that all particles with the same charge repel each other. However, we have not conducted experiments on the particles of a star 1,000 light years away, but what convinces us that this law is obeyed there as well is the order in the universe, because trillions of separate parts are currently moving according to the same law. For example, we observe that two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom combine to form a molecule, and this happens according to certain rules at certain distances, at certain angles. And after observing this repeatedly, we say that this is true for all water molecules. If we say that trillions of H2O molecules, unaware of each other, follow the same rules, and if we accept that they freeze at a certain temperature and take shape according to specific geometric rules as if performing a choreography, and if we say that this applies to the water molecule here as well as to a water molecule currently freezing in Alaska, this is thanks to the order in the universe, which allows separate parts to move according to the same rules. I only mentioned the H2O molecule. There are many other molecules with their own rules. Here, the void in science, which confines itself to naturalism, is not at the Big Bang, nor at the first living organism, but rather right now, as shown by a very legitimate question. Why and how are trillions of separate parts currently able to follow the same rules? Did we simply accept this as is? Because all of physics, all so-called explanations about the movements in the universe are based on this presumption. Professor, life is very complex, but there's also a lot of order. Isn't there order in every way? Complex? For example, an evolutionist atheist talking about chaos is, in my opinion, a very tragic case. Because fossil science, which is fundamental to the theory of evolution in paleontology, many methods used to calculate the age of fossils are based on the presumption that each element moves according to certain rules. In fact, the entire science of chemistry is based on this. Without believing in chemical order, it is impossible to talk about the theory of evolution. Let's just take a look at one example. Today, you know that carbon-14 atoms have a specific half-life, and that during this time, half of them transform into nitrogen atoms with beta emission according to this formula, and without assuming this applies to all carbon-14 atoms, you cannot perform chemistry or use this method to calculate fossil ages. The ability of scientists in separate laboratories to conduct carbon-14 tests for various purposes right now is based on the trust that all carbon-14 atoms adhere to their own radioactive rules. The fact that they do not suspect that the microscopes they use during experiments are misleading them is based on the belief that the photons hitting the object they are examining, passing through the microscope and reaching their eyes will adhere to optical rules moment by moment, not to mention other factors. So why and how? Look, it's not about billions of years ago, it's about right now. This is a question we base all chemistry on optical physics. Trillions of atoms of photons separate from each other right now. Why and how can they move according to the same rules? Do they possess the characteristics to do this? If not, as rational beings, we will need to search for someone who possesses these characteristics. I invite all science students who are subjected to naturalist ideologies to ask these questions in their classes. If they try to tell you about the millions of years of history of these materials, I insistently remind you that these questions are not related to even a second ago. Thousands of examples can still be given about these. The generalization that every accelerating charge creates a magnetic field, the generalization of gravity for all masses, the generalization of momentum conservation, optical laws, and so on. Remember that these also encompass events like earthquakes. That is, even during an earthquake, or when two stars collide, or during the movement of a cancer cell in the body, these rules still apply. There is no chaos. But why does it happen then? What is the wisdom behind it? This is the subject of the problem of evil. We will discuss it under that topic. But it still happens. And there is still order in motion. So yes, the universe is full of physical, biological, chemical, electronic rules. And thanks to these rules, we can conduct science, friends. This is a place where we can do science. Have you ever thought about this? This is a place filled with mathematical equations in every detail, a universe where we can find formulas. How can we talk about chaos here? You cannot find laws in chaos. Events cannot be formulated in chaos. If there were chaos in the universe, if parts moved randomly, it would not be possible for us to find even a single formula, nor would it be possible for a single branch of science about the universe to emerge. And we wouldn't be able to produce technology either. Yes, all the technology we currently have, computers, machines, robots, artificial intelligence products, and so on, they are produced thanks to the trust in the flawless application of rules related to electronics in the universe. The fact that your monitor currently displays images properly, that you can connect to the internet and retrieve data, the movements made by CNC machines in factories, Siri responding to you, the circuits in artificial intelligence robots functioning correctly, and so on. All of these, from micro to macro, layer by layer, trillions of particles and waves obeying their own electronic, mechanical, optical, quantum statistical laws. So why and how? Look, I'm not asking about the Big Bang or anything like that. I'm asking about the technological devices that are currently functioning correctly. Billions of protons, for example, are separate from each other. Why and how are they able to follow the same rules right now? How can billions of photons in fiber cables move according to the same laws? If we cannot answer these questions, which an unfree mind cannot answer, then it means we don't even know how the technology we produce works. Because we build everything on top of these principles. So, wasn't science supposed to fill in the gaps? Wasn't only the Big Bang and the first living organism left? Ask these questions to the priests of naturalism and see that despite science producing technology without revelation, it hasn't filled any gaps in the universe. On the contrary, as we encounter micro and macro worlds, the gaps have increased. I would like to talk here solely about the contribution of silicon's characteristics to our technology. But this is truly a topic in itself. That's why I'll leave this to the section on what technology actually is. Interestingly, it emerged with quantum physics. Normally, when you approach individuals forming a flag shape from the outside, you expect them to stop. In other words, you want to attribute the regularity in the whole to its parts. But as we journey to the bottom of matter to find the source of these regular motions in the universe, we realized subatomic particles, when combined, synchronously adhere to classical physics rules, but within their own world they have entirely different statistical laws. In the micro world, subatomic particles dance to entirely different rules, but when viewed collectively with millions of others, they dance to entirely different rules again. At this point, I need to clarify a concept that I see being misused. The chaos theory in physics. Friends, this definition in physics has nothing to do with chaos, which is the opposite of absolute order. Let's examine this immediately with an example. Right now, you see the motion of a pendulum connected by 3 points on the screen. It never repeats the same motion. In physics, this motion is called chaotic motion, and almost all movements in nature involving 3 interacting bodies are like this. A kind of originality and uniqueness in movements. So, is this chaos in the sense opposite to the order we've been discussing throughout the video? In other words, is the pendulum moving in violation of the laws? Of course not. The pendulum and all the molecules obey many laws such as conservation of energy, momentum, gravity, inertia, etc. moment by moment throughout its motion. In physics, the reason this motion is called chaotic is that it expresses our inability to calculate how the system will move after a certain period. Not in the sense of moving against the laws. For example, the dispersion of smoke in the air or the movement of water in a waterfall may seem chaotic and random to us. For example, that's why, despite having so many systems, satellites, etc., we can only forecast weather for 7 or 8 days at most. The reason is that the inputs affecting the state of the weather are numerous and complex. But this does not mean that air molecules move without laws. Nor does it mean that the water molecules in the waterfall behave without rules. No, all the molecules in these events still obey the laws of physics. Water still freezes according to certain rules. Heat transfer still occurs from higher to lower temperatures. We cannot see any lawlessness in the movement of the wind and snowflakes. Even if we look repeatedly, we still cannot see it. Since all these molecules behave regularly in their movements, energy changes and heat exchanges, we are already able to analyze these movements and produce formulas under titles such as heat and temperature, pressure, and energy. The fact that we cannot predict their movements after a certain period of time because there are too many inputs does not mean that they are acting without the law. Let me tell you something interesting. Don't look at the fact that many atheists say there is no order in the universe. Their belief in the perfection of the order of the universe underlies their refusal to accept extraordinary events such as the miracles of the prophets. Because what they call normal, order, and regularity are so well established in their minds that they never accept that there can be events outside these rules. The reason they don't accept it is their belief that the universe is absolutely ordered and that you can never go beyond it. Of course, this reaches such an extreme level that they start to deify these rules themselves, which we will discuss later. So, what can a free mind conclude by examining these lawful movements taking place around us moment by moment? For this, let's return to the metropolis. What characteristics would be necessary for the parts to comply with the rules? For example, if you don't know the rule of stopping on red and passing on green, can you follow this rule? But there are many people who know the rule yet do not follow it. So, knowing is not enough. They also need to choose to comply with the rule. But what if they know and want to comply but lack the power? What if none of these apply and they are also dead? Therefore, the concepts I occasionally use throughout the video, such as they comply with the rules, they form alliances, can only be metaphorical, because beings without knowledge, consciousness, will, and life can obey certain rules. And a free mind denies that it can even organize together layer by layer and obey some new rules. Faith begins with this rational rejection. No, they cannot follow the rules, they cannot form alliances. They cannot create choreographies and geometries that we humans can create by working and learning for months with great harmony. If time-independent and space-independent beings without knowledge, without consciousness, without life seem to act according to certain rules, who makes them do this moment by moment? It is imperative that there must be a being with a will, with a life, with a knowledge that has no time record and no space record and that encompasses all these rules. This is what wajibul wujud means. That is to say, its existence has become necessary intellectually. Its existence has become wajib, inevitable. So, we came to the scene, we saw ashhadu, la ilaha. None of those who appear to be doing this can do it. because they do not have the qualities and attributes that belong to the works they appear to be doing, then illallah. So the Quran is right. There must be someone who has these qualities, wajibul bawdud. All existence at every moment proclaims this to a free mind through its state of being.